Please, why don't you come sit here, please, Governor, and we will have Prime Minister Blair on the end by just sheer order of arriving at the stage.
They always do that to us. He always has to sit on the left, and I sit on the right. I mean, you figure it out.
I thought we were going apolitical today.
We are. I didn't say anything about politics, did I?
No, you're in the center anyway.
Exactly. Well, we both are. We both are.
Okay, I have my hands full today. I am Dr. Vanessa Carey, the CEO of Seed Global Health, the World Health Organization's Special Envoy for Climate Change and Health, and deeply honored to join all of you in what will be a really important discussion. This is not a discussion just about climate policy. It's going to be a discussion about leadership, about rising to the moment that we are in today and how to meet those challenges. One of those greatest challenges is climate change. Whether you call it climate change or you call it the greatest con job, it's happening, it is here, and we are feeling the effects every day. So after our conversation, our esteemed guests will need to step away for a moment to do an interview, but then they will join everybody in the reception. So I know everyone will look forward to having a moment together. I want to actually open, if I can, about the comments that we've been hearing at the UN this week. And I think really the challenge to climate change and the continued challenge and debate we have about climate science right now. And so, given the impacts on lives and livelihoods, I would like to ask both of you, from your perspective, how do we have climate no longer be a partisan issue, but a people's issue?
Go ahead.
Me?
Always age before beauty.
Oh.
Where does that leave me?
I mean, that's the first mean thing you've ever said to me. Look, I think that we did a paper not so long ago called The Climate Paradox, and the reason we called it a paradox is the following, that I think we can see the evidence of change all around us. It's fairly obvious, whatever country you're living in. The number of events that are spectacular, unprecedented. You know, this is something that I think people see and feel and believe, most people. However, the problem is that the source of emissions, the historical problems being created by the developed world, and the developed world therefore has a responsibility to deal with it. But the actual source of emissions right now is coming increasingly from the developing world, right? So if you look at the emissions in Europe over the last 30 years, they've fallen substantially, around about 30%. If you look at the emissions in Southeast Asia, they've risen by over 200%, right? So the problem that you've got today is that what that does is it gives you two challenges politically that are challenges not related to whether the problem exists, but are related to how you deal with it. And the first challenge is in the developed world, where people feel they're being asked to pay money in order to deal with climate problems. And you've got a cost of living crisis. So many families feel that they're being asked to pay what they really can't afford to pay. And in the developing world wants to develop. In fact, it's insisting on developing. Right? So they say, yes, okay, we agree climate change is a big problem, but it's you that's created the problem, and meanwhile, we've got to develop. So that's the paradox. The question is, what's the answer? And the answer is to focus on solutions that are going to work, not just for the environment, but for people's pocket, for the economics. And there we've got a lot of things that have happened that are actually good. I mean, when I was first in office and we were talking about solar and wind power, renewable energy, people said, yeah, well, we just can't afford it. It's far too expensive. Now, today, you can see it's much, much cheaper, right? Technology, artificial intelligence, the revolution that we're living through is going to make huge changes. You're getting a whole rebirth in nuclear power. I think we know a lot more about nature-based solutions today than we did a few decades ago. But we need those practical solutions if we're going to succeed. And we need one other thing that's absolutely vital, because we work as an institute in many, many developing countries. So if you take a country like Indonesia, we need them to retire their coal plants early, and we need to switch to renewable energy. But they need a flow of finance to do that, because the problem with renewable energy is that the upfront investment cost is quite large. But if you look at the financial flows going from the developed world to the developing world for renewable energy, they've fallen, not risen over the last few years. So why is that? Because we're not putting these projects in investable form, and we're not creating the right market mechanisms so that people feel that when they're investing in clean energy, they're going to invest and get a return. Right? So this is the issue that we got. And for nature-based solutions, for example, we've just been with the governor of Para province, where Blair, which is going to be the next COP conference. So they need to protect the rainforest. But as he says, you've got 30 million people there also needing jobs. So you're going to have to make sure that you have practical solutions. And that's what I think is the challenge today. The challenge is not to persuade people that there's an issue. The challenge is to persuade them that you've got solutions that make economic sense.
So let me ask you, please, Governor. I mean, in your role in California, you're one of the earliest champions of various environmental interventions, and you were moving across parties and partisanship, but creating solutions to move it forward. And so how did you find success in being able to bring those interventions forward and be able to get the kind of bipartisan backing that was needed so solutions actually get implemented and they aren't just stuck in the war of words?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that we're very happy that Dr. Kerry is doing this interview, because I have been a big fan and friend of her father, John Kerry, Secretary John Kerry. I don't know if you all know that, but I just want to make sure that you just know that. I mean, another liberal, but what the hell? I was married to one. So, I mean, I'm used to it. So he was a good friend of mine. I met him back in 1976 already, when he told me that one day he wants to be a senator and to run for president and all that stuff. I told him about my movie dreams and all of those things. So anyway, so we have been friends and skied together and all that stuff for years. And it's so great to see his daughter, because he's so proud of all of your accomplishments and everything. It's so great to have her here. But to answer your question, is that we in California have recognized very early on that if we want to move forward environmentally, that we have to kind of change the communication. And because we felt very strongly that the people had to understand what we are trying to do, because we needed the people to buy in. And so we saw that when we did polls and we talked about climate change, that the majority of people were not really thinking of it as a danger, that there was a problem there. 20% in the polls. But when we ask them about what do you think the problem is with pollution, then all of a sudden the number jumped to 55%. So we realized that we were communicating wrong. We were talking about something like you were just saying earlier, and very smartly so, what do you think about climate? Now, what the hell does that really mean? But that's what environmentalists and experts always call it. Climate. Let me talk to you about climate. What the hell does that mean? You can go down on Fifth Avenue in New York and you ask 100 people, what does climate mean? And they would have a different answer. So it's not really, I'd rather say, what do you think about fighting pollution? Terminating, that's a good word, terminating pollution. Or saying hasta la vista, baby, to pollution. That's what we should talk about, is pollution, because I remember one of our strong advocates in California was Ronald Reagan. He created the Air Resources Board. But he never talked about climate change. He talked about pollution. He said Nancy had teary eyes in the morning when she got up because of all the pollution. Then people said, yeah, I have problem breathing. We got to get rid of the pollution. So let's call it what it is. And so I saw that in California, the more we go and changed the definition of what we're really talking about and finding the words that people needed to hear, the more they went our way. And even later on, when the coal and the oil companies try to take out all of our environmental progress in California through a Proposition 23, we again learned very quickly that it was the communicating that was the more important thing than anything else. We talked about, they were ahead 60% in the polls, the fossil fuel companies. And we were at 40%. And they were going to win. 2 months later was the election, they were going to win. And then eventually, so we talked about the icebergs, and we talked about the glacier melting, and we talked about the polar bear, and the rising sea levels, and the disasters, and the weather conditions, and the fires, and the floods, and the storms, and all that. And it moved 2-3% in the poll numbers. But when the American Lung Association sent us a little footage of kids having problems with asthma and having an inhaler there, struggling to breathe and dying in an early age because of the Central Valley, of all the pollution, that all of a sudden was like magic. We put that on television, and immediately the poll numbers changed within a month and flipped it, and all of a sudden we were 63% ahead and they were losing. So there was communication. That is why I say it is so important for everyone to wake up. If we want to do the same thing over and over again, but expect different results, you know what Einstein said, that's insanity. But that's what they're doing. Environmentalists continuously to say the same thing over and over again. And I even heard like Biden, he meant well and did great things. But he said at the State of the Union address, next I'm going to talk to you a little bit about climate. I said, Biden, what are you talking about? Why don't you just say next time I want to talk to you about the danger of pollution? So it's like whoever writes this stuff, I don't know. But I mean, it's like, hello, are you out of your mind? Have you ever thought about that car companies, when they come out with a car, they go to marketing experts and they ask them, what language do we need to use to sell this Volkswagen? When we come out with a movie, the first thing the studio does is it tests the movie, and then it asks people and they study how to sell this movie. Should they sell it as a love story, or should they say, yeah, there is 15 people get killed in the first 3 minutes? Should we talk about that? Or should we talk about, that it is a wonderful scenic kind of a film? Or what is it that we should say? How do we sell this movie? That's what I'm talking about. We in the environmental movement, we got to study carefully. And then maybe it's different from country to country, but we got to study carefully of what it is that we need to do to communicate better, because right now the communication really sucks. It's that simple.
Thank you. I think the issue of communication is critical. And Prime Minister Blair, you have said in the past that it is a leader's job to say not what people want to hear, but what they need to hear. And how does that work in climate now? How do we take that change? What does the communication look like from your position?
Well, it looks a little bit like we've just heard, actually. And
you're going to stand up to political constituency and say,
well,
15 people are going to die from air pollution.
I mean, there are things that you can say if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, and things you can say if you're Tony Blair, and they're not always the same. So, by the way, we go back quite a long way. And just before I left office, Arnold came and very kindly did a school visit in the UK with me, which was in a primary school. So they were young kids, right? They were like sort of 5 to 11 years old. And we went down this little line of 5-year-olds, right? And it was a Catholic school, so there were all the nuns there. And so they were leading me and Arnold down this path with all the little girls there. And we heard as he went by, one said, "That's the Terminator." And the nuns looking around and thinking, "What are your parents doing?" I mean, this way. Anyway, you can communicate. The communication. Look, there's communication which is like Arnold's just done, which is, you really grab people's emotions, and that's really important. And then there's communication, which is how you set out an argument that strikes people as, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. I see what you're trying to do. And that's where I think this issue about the economics is so important. You've got to be saying to people, look, in the end, this is in your interests. We're not asking you to sacrifice yourself for this cause, because that's a very difficult thing to tell people to do in politics. You're having to say to people, look, this is a better way to live. It's going to be a cheaper way to live. I mean, we've got the possibility today, by the way, of vast amounts of cheap energy. So we've got to explain how we get there. And then we do have to deal with this, because in the end, the purpose is not just to convince our own publics that we need to act. We've also got to have a policy that, as I say, addresses this developing world problem, because it is a problem. I mean, China has built more renewable energy than the rest of the world put together. Right. China is the world's largest producer of electric vehicles, but by far, right, by far. They're also investing a massive amount in new coal-fired power plant. So and if you're a developing country, if you take Africa, where the population will double over the next 30 years, they're going to want power generation, they're going to want airports, they're going to want all the modern means of, they want to consume like we consume. So you're going to have to deal with that problem, and that is a lot about increasing the development of the technology, and also about this financial question. So I agree, you've got to communicate with people in the right way, but the thing that I find the most intellectually difficult part of this whole thing is, how do we persuade that developing world that there is an economically viable way to develop faster and better than burning fossil fuel? Because at the moment, I think they find that hard to.
But I was just going to ask, who's your audience, though, in these conversations, right? Because you've got the audience of private sector, or you might have the audience of policymakers and fellow, political leaders. And does the same messages resonate with these audiences, or do you have to tailor as you move?
Well, I think you do have to, because as a politician, if you're not able to ride a few horses at once, you shouldn't really be in the circus. There's definitely a powerful emotional message for people, but you've also got to be saying, okay, how do we, for example, create a flow of finance where, and there's lots of money in the world looking for things to invest in, where people are going to invest in renewable energy in, say, the Philippines or Vietnam. India, of course, is going to be, this is going to be a huge engine of development, right? How do you make sure that you've got a financial mechanism that allows people to go and take the money that's there and invest it and get a proper return? These are technical questions that may not make a lot of difference to how you present the argument in emotional terms, but you've got to fix some of these policy questions, because if you can't fix them, you can't really make progress. And I think the thing but the other thing you've got to persuade people of is, I'm an optimist, right? And I think, if you're
really important right now too, that we have some optimism.
Yeah, but you've got to look, as I always say to people about leadership, no one ever wants to get on a plane with a depressed pilot. You want to, you want to get on a plane with someone who's got something to live for. But so so you've got to be. I actually think there are real grounds for optimism, provided it's allied to practical solutions. And to put my finger maybe a little controversially on the point about, there's no point in just launching a campaign against fossil fuels, right? Because the truth of the matter is, our consumption of fossil fuels has remained static over about 20 years, and it's going to continue to rise in the next 5 years. So whatever policy solutions you come out with are going to have to take account of that. And that's why I think it's important to look at what are the alternatives and how are we making them economically viable.
That brings me to a question, actually. Thank you for that, those points. I wanted to ask you, Governor, because we live in an age of extraordinary technology, AI. The ability of the imagination is being stretched by all the things that are happening right now. And so if we take this idea that, okay, we are going to be looking at a reach for more, fossil fuels are going to continue to grow, it becomes a question now of how do we use technology then to counter this moment in the right way, or to sink carbon, or to help create the innovations that we need to catch up to where we are right now, because we are behind. We've already lived more days past 1.5 degrees than less as of last year. So how do we see transformation in the world today to be able to take us forward?
Well, again, it goes to communication, because I think that with the cell phones, we've seen it in Africa, cell phones spread like wildfire, and all of a sudden, they kind of jumped ahead and they didn't build the phone lines. So I mean, think about it. We built the phone lines like idiots, but that's all we know. To build lines and lines and lines and under those ocean lines and communication lines, all that stuff. And they just jumped ahead. And now they have cell phones. Everyone has a cell phone. Doesn't matter if you go to Africa, Middle East, or wherever, in some of the developing nations, there's cell phones. And I think the same thing has to happen with renewable energy, because they don't have to build power lines. They don't have to do any of that. I mean, they just can go, and we have to just educate them and communicate that the action is with solar and with wind and with renewable energy, and they can jump ahead and build all of that, rather than going to start building transmission lines. If every house, if they're taught that every little community, every house, every school can have their own little cell, their own kind of, energizer, so to speak, so they don't have to live off a transmission line. And this is I think that's the idea. They can do that, and we have to educate them, and we have to finance, and we have to help them finance that. I think there's a way of doing it.
By the way, especially if you have satellite technology as well. So
That's
that
right.
can also, if you then have the solar power, you'll get connected.
That's right, yes. And so I think the other thing that we should not forget about, that, of course, whenever you talk about the environment, is a no-no in saying, and I've been saying it for years, and that is nuclear power. I mean, there's always people, I remember the first time I said nuclear power, and you're laughing now because you say, oh, this is something that I cannot say. I say it all the time. I say, but I say it with total conviction. Because every time I remember back when I was governor, they said, don't say nuclear. I said, why not? They said, well, because, people are scared of nuclear. I say, okay, so let's explain to them, what are they scared of? Because we have had 4,800 nuclear deaths, accidental death. This is 4,800. And we have had in the coal industry, more than 100,000 deaths just in America alone, not even talking about other countries like China, where they had like 200,000 deaths and so on. Not even talking about that. But we continue doing coal, and we continue in China doing coal. And in nuclear, all of a sudden, people are scared of that. But in the meantime, with fossil fuels, 7 million people die every year of pollution. So I said to myself, I don't like nuclear power either. But I mean, it's better than fossil fuels. So why aren't we going with nuclear power? So that's my rationale about it. So just so you know where I'm coming from, and by listening to some of the experts, then now there are smaller plants that can be built, safer plants that can be built, and all of that. And I was so happy when President Biden decided to go and continue with our nuclear power plant at Diablo Canyon in California, because they were going to shut it down. And he said, no, let's extend it, because we need it. We need that is clean energy, totally clean energy. We've never had an accident there in California and any of those kind of things. So, I mean, to me, that's why I say, let's not forget that, because so many times in Europe they're struggling with the fossil fuels. We get it from Russia, and we get the gas from Russia, and the natural gas from blah, 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 and now we can get it, and it costs more money. Build some power plants over there. What are you talking about? Build some power plants, and then you're independent. You don't have to worry and shake all the time and pee in your pants when Russia says anything. I mean, that's what's going on. I mean, it just drives me nuts, just because they don't want to deal with reality. I mean, that's the reality. And the environmentalists way back in the 50s all agreed with nuclear power. Then all of a sudden something happened, where someone got money from the fossil fuel companies. They said, oh, nuclear is not good. So anyway, this is a whole other story, but I'm just trying to tell you, this is what the action is. I just tell it the way it is. I always told you, in politics and everything, I'm not a traditional politician. I'm a people person, so I always kind of sympathize with the people and to tell the people what I think is the right thing to do, rather than to think about the political future and all that stuff. I can't run for president. What the hell? I have no future in politics. So you have nothing to worry about. They have to plot something or something like that. So anyway.
So with two men on stage who cannot run for U.S. president, what I'd like to do is to actually open some questions to the audience for if anyone has any questions that they would like to pose, because you're going to get a spicy answer. And that is the kind of conversation that we need right now. Yes, please, in back. And hopefully someone has a microphone that they'll bring around to you.
Thank you. Bal Das. I enjoyed the conversation, but on a more sobering tone. On my way over here, I was talking to the man who was kind enough to offer me a ride, what he thought about the president's speech at the United Nations. What struck me, and I'd like your view, Prime Minister Blair, he said, look, this is all beyond me, but I can tell you one thing. I think there is something to do with trust. I liked what he said. I don't know if I should believe that. So I'd be interested in your views. I think there's a deficit of trust on the central issues that we are facing. How do you go about rebuilding that trust? Because without trust, you can make all of the most persuasive and pragmatic case. It'll not hold when it comes to buying the participation of the larger audience. And without that, none of the principal problems can actually be solved. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I mean, when Arnold was saying that he's a people person, I felt like saying I'm a politician person. Then I realized, no, you can't really say that. It's not a good idea at all. But the reason I sometimes stick up for the politicians is that, they're often trying to do their best in difficult circumstances where, because when I was in office, people would often say to me, you should listen to the people. And I would say, yeah, I'm listening, but you know what? They're saying different things. And sometimes they're saying things in contradiction to each other. And therefore, I can listen to them, but in the end, I've got to decide. And I think one of the things about trust in politics is that the best thing is to tell people the truth about how you see the situation, number one. And that's why I think, what Arnold was just saying about nuclear power, which I agree with, by the way. And, we're about to enter into a whole new era of nuclear power. But for a long time, people felt it was an article of faith to say it was a really bad thing, even though when they looked at the facts, they realized, well, nuclear weapons and nuclear power is not actually the same thing. And my institute did a paper which showed that had nuclear power continued to be developed at the rate it was being developed in the 60s and 70s through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, the impact on the climate would have been, and the reduction in emissions, really quite significant. And that's why I think is quite important in the relation to trust. And it's one of the reasons why I think some things the president said will have resonated with people is, the problem is when politicians take off the shelf what an activist group will say and just run with it without actually subjecting it to analysis of whether it's necessarily correct or not. So that is one thing about trust that I think is really important, because what I discovered in politics is that those that shout loudest don't necessarily deserve to be heard most, right? And therefore you've got to be in a position where you're prepared as a leader, to tell people what they don't want to hear as well as what they do want to hear. But the second thing, just very briefly, is the best way to give people trust in the solution is to show them it works practically. I mean, you can tell them it might work, but when they see it working, then it's a different thing.
Thank you. Do you want to take a stab at the question? Or would you like us to?
No, I know we're winding down, but I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to say before we leave, I think you should know my relationship with Tony.
Founded on trust.
I became governor of California, and I was putting together our environmental agenda, and it was a very aggressive agenda. And I've got really great advice there in California. It was not because of me. I just got great advice by people that were experts in that. I was not an expert in it. And then we came up with this idea with cap and trade. And the Democrats thought it was kind of a Republican right-wing kind of a trick. And I said, well, wait a minute, I read that in England they did that. Tony Blair did that. And they said, yeah. I said, so how could this be a Republican trick? I mean, this sounds absurd to me. But anyway, so we couldn't move forward with both of the parties buying in to my environmental kind of this AB 32 cap and trade. So then I got in touch with the Prime Minister, and I said, could you help us here? Because they think this is a conservative idea. If you could come over the next time you're over here in California, and I could maybe bring those speakers to you, the Speaker and the Senate Pro Tem. I said, could you talk to them? And he said, absolutely. And a month or two later, you came over to California to do a speech. And I brought both of the leaders to San Francisco. And the Prime Minister met with them. And then after that, literally like a week later, we signed the deal. He convinced the liberals that it was not a Republican trick or anything, that it was actually common sense and it was really good and it worked really well in Europe and in England, and that he will send us a team that will help us draft it in such a way that we don't make mistakes. And this is exactly what happened from very, very quickly, and in no time we did the deal. And this is where our big environmental moment came, and from then on it exploded in California. And so I just want to say thank you to Tony for his great, great help, because it was absolutely fantastic. And why I mention that all the time is because it did not just show that an English guy is helping an American guy, but it was kind of like someone that is known as a liberal helping someone that is known as a conservative. That was really the remarkable thing. And this is what we need much more of today, is where liberals and conservatives listen to each other, and when they have something that is to the best of the people, to work together and to meet in the center. That is so important, because politics is like President Eisenhower said, politics is like the road. The left and the right is the gutter, and the center is drivable. And this is why I said, he has always been able to work with the right. He showed me firsthand how he helped me to move my agenda forward, even though I'm a Republican. But that's what we need today in the world, is Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals and people in the center, everyone working together and looking at each other as human beings and in doing something, doing work that is good for the people and for the nation.
Thank
That's
you.
the bottom line.
We are at the end of time. I think that's actually a beautiful moment to stop on. And what we've learned today is don't fly with depressed pilots. We have learned that we've negotiated age before beauty. But on a much more serious note, I think what we have seen is that communication is critical. Building arguments that make sense, the economic argument, the bringing actual solutions forward and understanding where the barriers are to people understanding the challenges we face, be it how many people are actually dying from air pollution versus how many actually die from nuclear power, bringing that truth forward and understanding and value testing it, and having leaders like both here on stage who are bringing that pragmatic, smart, needed approach to answer the challenges we face today, but far more importantly, I think are bringing an optimism and a real truth forward that we deeply need. So thank you for building our trust.
Thank you. Thank you very much.